Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much to all of you for coming here today. To those of you here in our offices in Brussels, it's really nice to see you all again. And to the journalists who are joining us online, because we have quite a number of journalists joining from right across Europe. So welcome, everyone. This is the first press conference of a new presidency of ACEA, as Luca de Meo took over his new mandate just this month. So we're really pleased to welcome him here today, and he's really eager to kickstart his new presidency by sharing some thoughts with all of you today. But before he does that, I'm going to hand the floor to ACEA's Director General, Sigrid de Vries.
Thank you, Cara. And welcome everyone, also from my side here on site and online. It's really my great pleasure to welcome you all to this press conference, which indeed marks the start of Luca de Meo as president of ACEA. And he's taking up that role, I can tell you, with full enthusiasm. Mr. de Meo will speak to you today about the complexities of the huge transition that our industry is undertaking. And he will also lay out his vision and policy recommendations, which he will be sharing with the leaders of the EU institutions in the form of an open letter to be published later today. I would like to just stress how important the timing of these recommendations are, given the political landscape. As you all may be aware, tomorrow the much anticipated Green Deal industrial plan will be announced. And this is widely seen as the EU's response to the US IRA. Will this help keep investment in the EU? That's a critical question. And then next month, the Critical Raw Materials Act will be published, which is an essential stepping stone to improve the security of supply of the raw materials that are needed for electromobility. And we also have a Euro 7 proposal on the table, which we believe is counterproductive to our decarbonization goals. Before I hand over to Mr. de Meo, I'd like to give a bit of context also on how the market is faring. Our recent data, ACEA data, shows that last year car sales contracted by 4.6%, mainly due to the impact of component shortages, and that's not over yet. A total of 9.3 million cars were sold. That's the region's lowest level in 3 decades. And despite the uncertainties ahead, we do expect the market to start recovery in 2023. The number of new cars sold this year should be close to 9.8 million units, so up around 5% from 2022. But this is still 25% below the 2019 pre-crisis levels, showing that we are in a fragile situation. So this highlights why our industry must strengthen its position on the global stage. And I will leave it now to Luca de Meo to speak more about what is at stake, what needs to be done together with all stakeholders. Thank you.
Good. So thank you, Sigrid, and hello, everyone. Thanks for being present online or on site. Of course, it's a great honor for me to start my journey today with you at ACEA. And I also would like to thank Oliver Sipse and all my colleagues in the ACEA board for their trust. So if I had to only convey one message in this press conference, it would be this one. So Europe, automotive sectors is at the turning point. So the stakes are very, very, very high. And ACEA will be there to drive the change. ACEA is ready, of course, to integrate stakeholders' view, because we think that transformation, especially in this case, will be a team sport, not a solo play. But ACEA will also be assertive, speaking facts, looking for the truth, not just our truth. And ACEA will propose and focus on solutions that generate value for the European industry, of course, for the millions of employees in our branch, and for the hundreds of millions of citizens that use our products every day. So I think you probably already know it all, but I think it's useful to remind the weight of the car industry for the competitiveness of the European continent. We are talking about almost 13 million jobs in Europe. It's 7% of the total. We're talking about 30% of the total R&D expenses on the continent across industries. We're talking about the vehicles, so that means the cars, the light commercial vehicles, and the trucks that ensure 80% of the mobility of people and goods in kilometer every day. And this percentages are expected to remain very similar until 2050 and beyond. In absolute terms, Europeans travel more than 5 trillion passenger kilometers per year. And in 2050, this figure will actually increase to 6 trillion kilometers. In other words, automotive still is and will be one of the pillars and enablers of European economy and lifestyle. But not only. We are one of the sectors that have always ensured the leading position of Europe in global competitiveness, all the rankings, and of course, trade balance. Many of the best brands and the most admired companies around the planet are from here. And this is a fact. It is also a fact that with the proposed ban of combustion engine by 2035, we, European OEMs, are now facing a very asymmetrical business, industrial, and technological challenge that our competitors will not have. It is the right, I think, and the responsibility of people like us, people that do, people that invest, to commit clearly to the targets, but at the same time, to transparently stage the implications and the consequences. It's like in racing. I like racing. There is one that designs the track, but in reality, you have different ways of entering and getting out of the curves. And this should be the responsibility of the one sitting in the bucket and taking many of the risk, including its own survival. We have built within more than a century of work a solid competitive advantage around the value chain of combustion engine vehicles. With EVs, this will not be the case anymore in the short term, I would say at least. Our competitors have many cars in their hands that we don't have yet, namely upstream in the supply chain of battery electric cars. It is a fact that by 2030, for example, no more than 5% of the raw materials needed for battery production will be sourced in Europe. And on top of that, support from national and local authorities to our competitors has been massive and still increasing in China, with the Made in China 2025 plan, and in the United States with the IRA. They are not banning nor regulating, but rather massively stimulating the industry. All of that happens in a context where growth is mostly happening outside of Europe. In China, the market share of the foreign car makers is swiftly decreasing, being now under 50%. So it looks like we've been very open to welcome newcomers because the share of European manufacture is decreasing in Europe. And I ask myself, are we properly watching out the reciprocity principle that should normally regulate global trading architectures? In other words, no regional regulation can be imagined in isolation without considering the connection and the implication at the worldwide level, simply because we design products that have to be global to be profitable. So let's talk about another exciting challenge, decarbonization. Just to be clear on that one. We are, as an industry, fully committed to it, with over 60% of the global production of road vehicles generated by companies with net zero pledges. This percentage puts us way ahead of most of other industries. And just to put things in the right perspective, we should remind ourselves that while the automotive industry is asked to reduce passenger car emission by 100% by 2035, the power generation industry is asked for a 70% reduction, and the overall transport sector are asked for 50%. The best argument to prove that we are all in is the fact that, as I'm speaking, European car makers are investing 250 billion euro in electrification. Everybody has an opinion here. Everybody debates or even criticizes. But we are the ones putting the money and our resources on the table. In 2012, 10 automotive brands proposed 10 EV models in Europe. Today, 25 brands propose 40 models. The truth is that we are moving fast, unfortunately faster than other sectors. And I say unfortunately because I have to state it very clearly, this transition cannot be only about the automotive industry. It cuts across many industries, horizontally. It is a team sport that we must play together, and it's key that public authorities take the responsibility of orchestrating the strategies of the different players. Take the public charging infrastructure topic, for example. With 2,000 charging stations set up every week in Europe, we are way behind the 14,000 stations per week that would be required, according to experts, to ensure the transition to EV or just to service the vehicles that are increasingly hitting the road every day. There are still massive differences between EU countries in terms of average rollout speed. Some countries are currently reaching 30% of the target, when others are not even achieving a 5% rate. As of today, some 50% of the charging points in the European Union are concentrated in just two countries, Netherlands and Germany. Of course, we have challenges. I talked about that, but we also have to handle some paradoxes. On the one hand, car makers are forced to make increasingly expensive cars. Safety and emission regulation are increasing EV and ICE costs and basically forcing us to exit the small car segment. EV prices are structurally higher than ICE, and I'm afraid the speculation on raw materials prices will not allow this change too soon. I can bet that in 1910, even a Ford T was more expensive than a horse. This is actually pretty normal for a new technology at the beginning. On the other hand, we are summoned to defend European consumers' purchasing power that we know is under pressure. Electricity consumption will probably have to be heavily taxed to compensate for the shortfall in tax revenues. And we already see EV purchase incentives being cut everywhere in Europe for obvious budget reasons. This is the puzzling world we are in. One thing is certain. In this very challenging context, the response of the European institutions is of paramount importance. We need the institution on our side. We need them to be coherent, consistent, fact-based, and orchestrating the various industries and stakeholders. We call on Europe to put in place an ambitious automotive industrial policy to rival those of other world regions while safeguarding and promoting free trade across the globe. Striving for reducing the impact of mobility, we should not disregard technological neutrality. The enemy is pollution, not one technology or another. Today, from a scientific point of view, high-tech hybrid technology, for example, can compete in terms of CO2 footprint too. We also need the regulator to ensure consistency between the short, mid, and long term. It doesn't seem to be the case with the sequence from Fit for 55 package to the 2035 ICE ban to the recent Euro 7 proposal. In its current form, Euro 7, according to our engineers, could increase the cost of the cars by €1,000 on average. It means raising the final pricing by twice as much for the customer. With such an increase, we estimate a substantial reduction of the new car market by about 7 to 10%. We know that people will keep old cars more time or will buy used cars instead of new ones. It is already happening, and car park is aging everywhere. We argue that we could achieve a far better cost-benefit ratio if we reorient the huge investment that would be required by Euro 7, allocating them to accelerate electrification, making EVs more affordable, or reducing the current fleet emission, for example, via drop-in low-carbon fuels. ICE vehicles will be the majority of the car park even beyond the 2050. If we want to go to zero by then, we should also handle this challenge. This is part of the truth. The Euro 7 proposal, in its current form, will have a strong impact on business and our people. The deadlines are too short. The boundary conditions are too broad. For example, at Renault, it could lead to the closing of at least 4 plants over a short time frame. And we are just talking about one car maker. In a moment where key choices are made, shaping the mobility of the Europeans and the industrial future of our continent in the coming decades, the best thing to do is to tell ourselves the truth. We are motivated to engage in an open conversation with all the stakeholders, the regulator, the citizens, the NGOs, but it is crucial that every participant also accept our point of view into the public debate. It takes 2 to speak the truth, 1 to speak and another 1 to listen, said the American philosopher Henry David Thoreau. You can count, I think, on ACEA, on the ACEA team, engaging with the right mindset. I think me personally, Sigrid, all the representatives of the board of ACEA, we all share the responsibility to put the conversation at the right level. What we are asking for today is a strategic approach, an open vision, a realistic schedule, and above all, the opportunity to partner and bring the voice of the auto industry into the debate. What we are offering is our determination to achieve the objectives we're given, transparency, and the fact-based approach, in addition to the daily work of our people, of millions of Europeans. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll now open the floor. I'm not sure if the mic is on. We'll open the floor, thank you, for your questions. Just a few housekeeping rules before we start. So Mr. De Meo is speaking as the president of ACEA here today. He's not speaking as the CEO of Renault Group. So I just have to say that up front, we won't be taking company-specific questions. I'm sure that's not good news for some of you, but it's really about the EU automobile industry, and Mr. De Meo wants to share a lot of his views on the way forward for the whole industry today. For those of you in the room, if you just state your name and your media outlet, and also there is a possibility for journalists who are following us online to pose their questions. You can do so by writing them in the comments. And if you would kindly write the name of your media outlet at the start of your question, that would be really helpful. So we're going to start with the floor, and I think the first hand I saw was here. My colleague will pass you a mic. Thank you.
Thank you. Javier Espinosa, Financial Times. Your preamble eliminated about 5 questions I had on my list. But you alluded in your speech about what China and the US are doing versus the EU, i.e. incentives versus regulation, specifically on China and the rising dominance of the battery market. What would you like the EU specifically to do? And secondly, on the IRA, do you think Europe needs its own version, or would it incentivize companies like Renault to start opening factories or moving operations to the US?
This one, I don't think this is like complete interest of the European community. You want to answer before, or you want me to get into?
I think these are the core questions,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, no, they are the core questions. Do we want an own version? We're very much looking forward what's coming out of the Commission channels tomorrow, and then also, of course, to the discussion next week at the EU summit. We believe that the EU has a lot of instruments, has a lot of funding, has a lot of good policy, and it's about better integration, more coherence, and trying to make it more tangible and more concrete. Because we can all agree very quickly on a more general level, but it's actually about real action that works on the ground. And I could give you the example of the CHIPS Act that we know a bit more about. Full of good intentions, really good that the EU sees that as a strategic issue, but it doesn't really cater for the needs of the automotive industry. And this is about, okay, then putting these intentions into real action, and how do you do it? So that, with regard to the second question, do we need our own version of the IRA? On batteries, I think equally we need more mining, but also refining and processing here in Europe. This will take time. So we cannot go around that. It will take time. But again, a coherent, coordinated policy to build up Europe's strength also on the battery side is important.
Yeah, I mean, I can just confirm what Sigrid said. I think on the we have the EV value chain is very different, right, than the combustion engine thing. So you know, really upstream from the sourcing of the material to the refining. To, of course, the installing the capacity for the battery. The company are investing in partnerships, sometimes themselves directly. So, but it's going to take time to actually catch up and especially follow the let's say the ramp up of electric vehicles in Europe. So I think we are all on the same boat. It will take time, and I think that one of the key issue is the coordination. So the role that the authorities can is the coordination across the industry, so that all the technological, let's say, and investment roadmap, they hit the right time, and exactly the timing. This is one of the things where the authorities can really play a role, because I can't decide the plan for energy industry or infrastructure industry, right? So we are focusing on doing cars, etc. And so that's a key role. And when it comes to, when I see things like, you know, the Green Deal and what is going to be, presented for us, it's a good news, because what we need is authorities and the government to stimulate and to unlock this continuity, rather than regulating or fining for not achieving. This is a better conversation for us.
So you're saying yes to an IRA European style?
I think it depends on the content of it, but I think Europe has to respond with the in industrial, let's say, policy, because the balance, because of those decisions worldwide has changed. So we need to play our role. We need the strategy, and we are more than happy to contribute to the conversation to make it right, because it's going to be more effective and more efficient potentially, if the industry says what we need, what are our priorities, how can we do it? So.
Okay, one question here at the front.
Albertina Torsoli from Bloomberg. 2 questions. You mentioned at the start that you believe in ACEA and it has to be a team sport, not a solo play. Stellantis and Volvo have exited.
Yeah.
Is that a cause for concern that your action will be less relevant? And are you trying to get those people back on board? Or, you know, how do you keep all the other members on board? Just some color on that. And also, we are also looking obviously at the US and what's happening in terms of price cuts in the US. Tesla first, Ford yesterday. Obviously, these are EV models, US market, but analysts do expect implications also for the European market. Are you worried about a race to the bottom in terms of prices for EV cars, and how will that shape 2023 in Europe?
But look, on the first one, of course, Stellantis Volvo decided to leave ACEA. They are, you know, it's an association. They are independent companies. They decide whatever they want to decide. I think that what we can do, and we're trying to do with Sigrid and all the colleagues, is to actually reinforce the credibility of ACEA. And also the impact that ACEA has on the debate. So we'll probably, you know, stage in the next few months a new, let's say, approach to some of the issues. What we're saying today is we commit to, you know, the targets and the demands that are coming from the authorities in the interest of the society in general. We want to be straightforward and tell the truth, not our truth, and we want to speak the reality with fact. And because of that, I am very optimistic that we can all stick together as an industry, because we have a lot of common grounds, and hopefully, or at least that's my hope, you know, in 12 months, 24 months. With the work that we would have done together and all the team, ACEA will become a more and more listened, you know, entity and participating to the debate. That's what I can do, I think, or at least that's an intention.
No, absolutely. And I've also encountered a very confident industry with lots of shared interests and concerns. And as some of the areas that we're working on, or most of them, they're not a unique space covered by just some. Yeah. They're shared, they're very serious. They need a joined up industry voice. And I think that's what ACEA does and can deliver. And we have a very motivated membership to work with, so happy with that.
Yeah, we want to be transparent, we want to be more and more assertive, also connected to other associations and open to the debate, even with people that not necessarily share our point of view. I think it helps because we all learn, but and you know, we'll find a way to get the voice of the automotive industry to be more and more relevant into the thing, which has not always been the case for whatever reason in the last years.
Second question was on price.
Yes, yeah, I mean, of course, this kind of movements are not necessarily, let's say, not necessarily easy to handle. I'm not sure that they are structural, because in fact, at the end of the day, everybody's trying to protect his margin, and cost of electric vehicles is still relatively high. So we have to see if this thing is consolidating. I mean, this is a question on pricing that I cannot answer for the industry and for my colleagues. But I think that a battle on pricing on electric cars right now, when we are, you know, starting the operation, is not necessarily the best thing that could happen to the industry, because we have to invest. We have to generate margin also for electric cars. Otherwise, this thing will become from the beginning a not very healthy business. And yeah, I mean, everybody then will have his own approach to the thing. So I cannot answer as a CEO of Renault here. So we can do it later, but.
Okay, I'm going to take a question from journalists who are joining online. We have one from Eric Bergerol from the magazine Challenge in France. Purchasing power is definitely not on the rise. Has this reality impacted the public perception of the urgency of the switch to battery electric vehicles? Meaning, are authorities starting to accept the idea that 2035 might be too soon? So purchasing power on the rise. Has this affected the public perception of the urgency?
But I think that, as I said in the, in the introduction, I think that there is, somehow everybody's trapped by into some kind of a misunderstanding, which is, you have to do you have to go with a new technology, okay, and then you expect that the new technology would be cheaper than the previous one. It doesn't work like this in many heavy industry, simply because of the investment that you have to put at the beginning, and you have to amortize on the volumes. It's as simple as that. Okay, so telling the story that EV will also mean more accessible and cheap cars, it's a story that doesn't match the reality. Okay, so normally at the beginning, new technologies is more expensive. Then with the volume, it goes down, like it happened in the automotive industry with combustion engine. We've been working more than 100 years, and and I think that the automotive industry has proved to be one of the most effective to reduce the cost of the product because of the scale and the volume. So it's just a question of time. So believing that we can do the two things, that means reduce the cost and ramp up the operation, it's a bit of an oxymoron, if you want. So I think that electric cars will be bought by, at the beginning, by affluent people in urban and suburban areas that have the possibility to charge, etc., etc. So this is the reality of the thing today, and we have to again to speak the truth. That's why we also, let's say, many believe that we have to, let's say, respect the principle of technological neutrality, so that we can find solutions that are affordable. Look at the case of Renault, if I may. In this case, we have, that kind of a double level thing with the Renault brand going, full electric on one side, and then you have the Dacia, which is waiting the time where batteries will go down in price. There's one thing which is also important, is that a battery is 40% of the cost of an electric vehicle. 80% of the cost of a battery is in raw material. The whole sourcing of the raw material we don't necessarily control. So there might be speculation on the cost of the raw material as they have happened. So it's something that we are not sure we will control, because it's not in our hands. So this is the risk. And we are seeing that right now because of, the geopolitical issues, etc. This is happening now. The cost of nickel, cobalt, etc. is going up.
Thank you. I'm just giving a quick check to see if there are any questions in the room. Yes, go ahead.
Hey, this is Taimas from the French press agency. Could you give us a forecast on the chip supply for this year?
I think it's getting, I think it's getting better in terms of availability in general. It's a different behavior between segments, because that's a very complex industry behind. So it's not, the same for each one of the segments. I think in general it will be a problem that we will have to bear for some time. So it's not like a short-term thing. So, many of my colleagues also mentioned the same, and people from the semiconductor industry. So we will have to be, let's say, able to live with it. But I think we learned a lot in the last couple of years. But it's going to be a less fluid, I would say, for the automotive industry, as a less fluid supply chain architecture, and a little bit more complex than it used to be before. Also because, the new cars are getting more and more hungry of semiconductors. So there's all the companies have done a great job to redesign, supply chain, sometimes to redesign the product, to standardize some of the modules. So we will live with it for a while. It's very difficult to say, 6 months, 1 year, 24 months, 3 years. I can't make, from my, let's say, point of perspective, a forecast. To be honest, it will be it will be not reasonable. But there will be tension, but it's better.
Okay, thank you. We can take one more from the room, and then I'll go back online.
Hi, Fanny Roux with Context. Mrs. De Vries, you talked about, it's a follow-up on the industrial policy. You talked about, you called for concrete actions at the EU level. Would you have some concrete example of actions you would like to be implemented? And Mr. De Meo, you mentioned ACEA's upcoming new approach on issues. Could you please elaborate on that? What did you mean? And lastly, if I may, you insist a lot on delivering the truth and not only your truth. Why is that? Thank you.
Concrete action, it's absolutely difficult to come up with a list very quickly on concrete action. But I think the EU policymakers are looking in all the right directions. So they look at, first of all, I think making available funding that can support investments available in an easier and a more quick way. And this is one of the advantages of what the US have proposed and are implementing. It's really easy, it's simple, it's available, it's quick. And that is, I think, what is lacking at EU level. So one needs to search for improvements there. And this can be access to finance, it can be on the permitting side. So that needs to be looked at. And then, as Luca de Meo already mentioned, it's really about coherence in policy making, the regulatory framework, make that as supportive as possible. So there are many different regulations either in place or proposed, and they can work in a counterproductive manner. And that's exactly what we can't use today. We should have everything working into the same direction. And I can again mention Euro 7, which is counterproductive when it comes to the decarbonization effort that industry is making. So the regulatory framework, the regulatory burden is an important element of what we believe the EU's response should be to the competitive pressures coming from other regions in the world.
So talking about ACEA, I mean, it's not me. We're going to do it together with all the colleagues. So maybe the question was again for Sigrid, but I speak under your control, Sigrid. But the whole issue is, in my opinion, is to actually open ACEA to other segments of stakeholders. Okay, I think that take the example of today. Maybe speaking with Cara, she would tell me that probably in the room there will be 10 people. Now you're probably more than 20 or 30, and we have actually opened the, let's say, the communication in hybrid mode into online because we want to, increase the scope of the thing. It's a good example of it. So we want to be open, we want to tell the thing, we want to reach more people. And I think that we have to speak the truth, that we have to speak common sense, and we have to speak to the public. We have to speak to, to the general public and not only to specialists. Telling some kind of, we say the truth, but credible, credible facts and stories. That's why one of the things that we're going to do more is probably partner with some very, I would say, respectable and respected institution to publish reports with data and facts that are not coming necessarily from, the communication department of each one of the OEMs, because there might be always the doubt that we're telling our version of the story. So I think it's going to help to clarify some of the topics. I think it's going to help to get us into the mainstream conversation. And I think it's going to create credibility for ACEA as a contributor to the debate, because some of the things, some of the topics are not so easy to interpret or not so easy to understand also. Yeah?
No, exactly. It's often about very technical things
Yeah.
or about industrial cycles or industrial realities. And there's simply too much at stake not to also have industry as a partner around the table. And I think it's as simple as that. The challenges are so huge and complex. they cannot be solved by industry alone, nor by any other stakeholder alone. We really need to work together, take this integrated approach. And I think this concept may have stayed at a very abstract level for years, but I think it's becoming way more concrete now, because indeed it was touched upon before, affordability issues, accessibility of mobility is really becoming a topic also for policymakers. And that is because now reality starts hitting the ground, right? With the Green Deal, we have had a huge amount of ambitions being enshrined in regulation, and that is really pushing Europe, including its industries, which is good. But now it needs to be implemented and established and worked out. And as I say, reality is starting to hit. So yeah, speaking the truth, I think, is about that we bring in all these relevant elements that we feel may be underestimated at times or undervalued.
And I think it's also, let's say, it has to be accepted that people like us defend an industry that has such an impact on the European economy and society, right? So we employ 13 million people, 70% of the active population in Europe. 30% of the R&D in the private sector is in our budgets. You understand the thing? I mean, probably the automotive industry is in the top ranking in terms of creating value and trade balance for Europe. There are half a trillion euros that are, let's say, of tax income coming to the different nations because of the mobility thing. I mean, you have to understand that we are here also to defend the job, the work of millions of people that are working for us. And of course the consumer, and of course respect the thing, but that's our role. And we don't want to be defensive into the thing. We want to be assertive about the importance of this industry. I mean, some of the best and most admired company across sectors, they come from the automotive industry and they are European. This is an asset for the continent, very clearly.
Okay, I think we have a question right at the back. Jessica, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you. Ilse de Winne, Belgium Business Television. Which elements from the IRA does ACEA consider potentially the most harmful for European car makers?
There are two elements, I would say. One is directly about incentivizing electric vehicles, where we believe there's no longer a level playing field. And the objective is about greening technology, and we believe that should be accessible for all competitors, all companies around the world. And that's also how, for example, the incentive system in the EU is designed. It doesn't discriminate. The other part of the IRA where we have concerns and worries is about the investment climate that the US are creating for a deep value chain about batteries. And this is exactly what the EU also aims to do. They have put in place the Battery Alliance, for example. The EU is on track, but it's not going quickly enough. It will take time to build up that value chain, and this could now be jeopardized by attractive proposals made by, in this case, the US.
Thank you, Sigrid. I'm just going to take one more question from our online journalists. We have a question from Autocar, Nick Gibbs, about the cost of Euro 7. Which aspect of the proposals are costliest? So what is the cost coming from?
But the cost is coming from the, let's say, the thousands and millions of hours of testing that are required to homologate, let's say, all the engines, all the variants, etc., etc. So this is the issue, and of course, catalyst and other technology that we have to embed into the product. Okay, so I think it's more of a the whole operation of getting Euro 7. But we don't know exactly right now the perimeter, so it's still under discussion. And what we're claiming is that probably, in general, that the Euro 7 will not have based on our analysis, a huge impact, incremental impact for the money and the time and the people who have to put in. But we also think that the conditions the way they are defined today are actually extremely difficult to achieve, okay, and to confirm. So this is the thing. So, but when it's not only, you know, the parts that we put in the car, is the investment that we have to put to get to comply with the regulation.
And it's testing hours indeed, but I believe also the testing conditions.
Yes.
We believe the Euro 7 should be really in proportion to what it aims to achieve. And with current Euro 6 standards, already 95% of driving conditions are covered. Euro 7
use cases.
would be looking to cover the remaining 5%. And in order for that to happen, because we're not talking regularly driving conditions, you need to really make engineering expenses and make tremendous investments to get there without even knowing if you can ever cover 100%. So it's really about these conditions and making a law that is proportionate to what it tries to achieve.
Thank you. We are running a little bit over time, but I think we have some margin. So I might take one other question from our online guests. It's from Tony Fuentes, Coche Global. We are seeing that electrification of Europe has 2 or more speeds. What does ACEA propose? Perhaps unify the incentives to reach the same goal of 2035. So it's about 2 speeds in Europe when it comes to electrification. What do we have to say?
Do you want to
I suppose this is about the difference way that electrification spreads across Europe. There are more affluent countries in Europe and less affluent. There are countries, as you already said, with more charging options available. Others are not so far progressed yet. So if you could say that creates a 2-speed, I don't know. I think for me it illustrates that indeed it's not just about delivering or supplying the technology and the vehicles for that matter. The vehicles are not so much the issue. They are there, they can be produced. You have issues with chips or batteries, but the technology is there. The issue really is the enabling conditions. So that's the charging infrastructure. It's indeed building up this battery value chain in Europe. It's about incentivizing the market so that the market kicks off, and also about mindset. What mobility do you use and when and for which use cases? And then we have not just passenger car mobility, but also commercial vehicles, so heavy-duty transport and transportation, which is the lifeblood of our economies as well. So I think it's about working together. You need to really get it right on all these dimensions of this huge transition that's very complex.
Well, you know, this transformation will happen from north to south, like many other things, even digitalization or internet. It came in Europe from north to south because of also the purchasing power, you know, and the wealth of some of the nation. And the paradox is, of course, if Europe has to legislate, they have to do something for all the country at the same time. But the reality again is that it would be easier for Norway to go to ban combustion engine than for Portugal or the south of Spain or Italy, where I come from, because of everything. So that's exactly about talking common sense and the truth and integrate that into a plan. Yeah, because this is what gonna happen. You can write it down, but then you cannot, let's say, you cannot stop people in the south of Italy or Spain to drive a car or to buy a car, because, you know, that's what is gonna happen. So let's face reality, let's be pragmatic, put a plan together and understand that, you know, and have the right assumptions.
Thank you. Maybe we can take one last question, and I'm seeing several people with their hands up. I think you both asked a question before, I think, have you? If it's very quick.
I'll follow up from our colleague's question about the most worrying elements of the IRA. If we could also hear from you, Mr. Meo. I was just
I mean, no, if
No,
you
it's for the online.
if you want the, let's say, the issue for us, and in terms of course there is a you know, proportionally a lot of money going in from the American government. Okay, so it's disproportional to today's intention. So let's see what happens. But it's huge money going in first, easy to access, etc., etc. The other thing is that, in a way, the IRA is trying to defend the local production, and you know, a lot of European brands also export to US, etc. So they need to be protected, because if we start to do, you know, things on the geographical perimeter of the thing, then it's a different world. And this is the thing we will have to you know, to manage. So this thing is clearly, if I remember correctly, let's say the IRA is actually impacting on 12% of the potential cars that are sold in the US as an EV today.
Under a leasing scheme.
Yeah, under the leasing scheme. So it's actually focused on, you know, local production with the local value chain and supply chain, etc. And that's not what we do. I mean, normally what we do is, if a car is below a certain price and with certain characteristic, everybody can get, whether you are American, Chinese, Korean, Japanese, etc., you can access as a customer. This is not the case. This is the other thing. So it's the money and the logic of the story. So, and we have to design in Europe something that is effective, and always have in mind what I mentioned before, a principle of reciprocity, because all the regulation, our products are global, right? Every time we do a platform, we do a thing, we always think about taking this technology and move, because otherwise, without that scale, you don't do profitable projects. The automotive industry is not a local industry, it's a global industry. And therefore, when someone is regulating in a region, and you have a local producer there, you have to understand that the impact and the connection with the other regulation of the industry. It's very difficult, but how do you get the ACEAs of the other, you know, to be aligned? Already it's difficult to align within the different nations, but at the global level is complicated. But we need, as an industrials, we need, you know, a kind of a worldwide thing. This is the reality, playing field.
I think we can take one very, very last one, if it's short. I'm going to give the floor to someone who hasn't spoken yet, if you don't mind, if it's short.
You have to give Albertina, otherwise she will blame me.
Javier Albizu from the
for
Spanish
weeks.
news agency EFE. A follow-up on my colleague's question. You're talking about this IRA response and answer in Europe, but how do you combine, because you also want free trade to be promoted, so how do you combine this sort of protectionism that you're sort of demanding in Europe with a free trade? Like, where's the balance of that?
Good question. Yeah.
Not asking for protection.
No, we are not asking for protection. We are not asking. I mean, that's the official position of the ACEA. So maybe some people will have a different opinion, but this is not what we are asking for. And that's what worries us a little bit about some regulation that, on the contrary, are...
We're asking for competitive framework conditions,
yes.
and that consists of, you know, financial elements. It consists of how state aid rules, and if they are flexible enough, especially and temporarily. Important to point out, it's indeed about tax breaks. It's about financial, but it's also about non-financial. That's why I mentioned the regulation before. It's the overall investment climate. That's what it is about. Make sure that that is competitive.
You know, the European automotive industry are all interested to be competitive worldwide, because, you know, the European market is a kind of a substitution mature market. So the growth is outside.
Yeah.
And of course, we have to transform, you know, car park and our industry here to go to, you know, zero impact, etc., etc. So there is a lot of work to be done on the continent. But as in general, those companies, they have to be able to breathe and do business outside. That's our role.
Okay, so I don't want to get Mr. De Meo into trouble, so we give a last word.
One very quick question. One of the biggest issues fourth quarter was the lack of shortages of truck drivers,
Yes.
which gets worse, seems to get has gotten worse in Europe. Are you optimistic for this year, or are you still seeing massive shortages of
There are
truck
a lot
drivers?
of still a lot of issues from what we see in Europe for example on harbors on the whole transport on the logistic chain. Okay, so of course normally at the end of the year, what happened in last year is that everybody started to have components after the summer, so everybody tried to produce things and to get the cars in the dealers to deliver customers that were waiting for 6 months, 8 months, 9 months. So of course there was a bump. So if you feel it less urgent right now, but still the whole logistic system is not in the right place right now. From in all dimension, I would say. So the world is still recovering from a few years of up and downs, and the problem that are around the world. It's a more difficult world than it used to be, 10 years ago or 15 years ago in the industry. That's for sure.
Okay, I think with those words highlighting the challenges ahead, we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming.
Thank you for coming. Huh?
Yep,
Thank you.
thank you for
Thank
those of
you.
you online for your questions. A lot of them we got, but they were covered already by those in the room. We have a press pack. You have our press release that we're putting out shortly, as well as the open letter from Mr. De Meo that's going to be sent out this afternoon. So you have it there in your press pack. And yep, thank you again. Bye-bye.
Playing games with love. I'm so tired. You playing with my heart in love, and I know you feel a little bad. So why don't you quit playing with my head?